and welcome. I'm Dawn Peters of Connection Hub. Are you moving, downsizing, or maybe you're an executor or trustee? Well, then this show is for you. Lots of great information on Estate Sales 101. And to speak to that topic today, we have Daniel Sanders of 4Sales. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. I'm sure there's so much information that we can pack into this time. Tell me a little bit about 4Sales and the history of it, because I know there's a great story behind it.
Sure. Well, 4Sales was founded in 1972. So we've been in business for 45 continuous years. And anyone who's operated a retail operation in the state of Virginia knows that staying operational for that long in a sales tax environment means doing it right from the beginning. But the company was originally founded by 4 enterprising young women, and they're represented in our logo, the 4 paper cutouts. And shortly after they got started, they found that it was actually really hard work, and 4 enterprising young women became 2 enterprising, slightly less young women, and about 30 years later became 1 dude, which is when we took over the company. My wife and I took over the company, and it's been an exciting run since. I got into the business almost by circumstance, by happenstance. I had been working as a government contractor, and the contract that I was on came to a screeching halt, as many government contracts do. And the next morning I was out on a lacrosse field, and a friend of mine started talking to me about this company and said, what do you think? I said, well, I think I have a little time on my hands, and I'm pretty good at sales and operations. And 15 days later, I owned half the company, and
wow.
86 days later, because I owned 65% of the company, and a year later, I was 100% owner of 4Sales. And since then, it's been a really exciting run.
Wow. Well, obviously, I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions to this topic. So if people want to call in, please call in on 276-991-TALK. That's 276-991-8255. And in fact, I understand we already have a caller. I told you, popular topic. So I understand we have Chuck from Fairfax. Is Chuck there?
I'm here.
Hi, Chuck. How are you? You're on the phone or on the air now to Daniel Sanders. Please ask your question.
Hi, Chuck. Daniel Sanders here. What can I do
Great.
for you?
Excellent. So my parents were getting ready to move them into a home, and they've accumulated a lot of knickknacks and furnishings and some what I believe is some decent furniture, but I'm not sure if it's worth anything in having a company like yours come out and take a look. How do I know?
Well, the easiest way to know, Chuck, is actually to have us come out and take a look. Our consultations are without charge, and frankly, any estate sales company you talk to, whether it's us or someone else, they should never be charging you for a consultation. Now, if you're asking them to appraise the contents of the home, that's different, because that isn't a paid service. But we would come out, take a look at what it is that you're planning on selling versus not selling, Chuck, and then based on that, that'll give us a pretty good idea of the financial range that it might deliver in the resale market. Now, something you should be aware of is that we have seen declining prices in a number of different categories, and we've seen other categories stay strong over the years. But in the last decade, we've seen a substantial drop in the resale prices for used furniture. So that is good quality furniture, however, is maintaining its prices fairly well. But upholstered furniture is a real non-starter in most environments. But we love small things: crystal, china, silver, porcelain, figurines, glass, paperweight, stamps, coins, artwork, jewelry, antiques, collectibles, tools, vehicles, and good hardwood furniture. But the easiest way to find out is have us come in and take a look, and we'll tell you what you can expect.
Does that answer your question,
sounds
Chuck?
great. That's pretty much it. I need to have you guys come out and take a look.
Well, sure. Just give us a call at 703-256-8300, the company's main line, to schedule an appointment, and we'll be happy to send a team member out to meet with you and your family. Thanks for your time. I appreciate the call.
Thank you for your call, Chuck. So Daniel, perhaps for those who, probably like myself, who think an estate must equal a huge estate, tell me the range of sort of homes that you deal with.
Well, that's a great question, Don. I think the first thing we probably need to do is define the term estate sale, because
Right.
it is something that's changed. 10 years, 20 years ago, when they talked about an estate sale, they were, well, not to put too fine a point on it, they were talking about dead people's stuff. Right? This is a situation where someone had passed, and now the family had a house full of things they had to get rid of. that definition has changed over time, and it's changed in function of how the people who use estate sales services have changed over the years. So now it really refers to the professionally managed sale of personal property. So it's where a third party comes in and helps you sell your family's personal property. And if you think of it that way, rather than as a something that happens when a person is deceased, that would take you to the logical conclusion, which is reflected in our numbers, and numbers being the profiles of our clients. 50% of our business is just people who are moving and downsizing. The other 50% are what we refer to as true estates, or reverting back to the old definition.
Right. Oh, thank you. Well, we're lucky enough to have another caller. Again, if you do want to call in, the number is 276-991-8255. But if we can now go to Dan from Tyson's Corner. You're on the line to Daniel. Dan, are you there?
Hello?
Hi, Dan.
Yep, I'm here.
Hi.
Yes.
So you're on the phone to Daniel if you'd like to ask your question.
Sure. So I'm an estate planning attorney, and we do a lot of estate administration, so a lot of dead people stuff. And as you've suggested, that you often have to deal with all of the personal property when someone passes and you've got to administer their estate. So what should I be looking for in an estate sales type company? What are the things I should be looking for? How should I best work with them to most efficiently deal with all the property?
Well, fantastic, Dan. Thanks for the question. Those are great questions, and some of them are pretty lengthy and complicated in their answers. But let me see if I can synthesize that down to some more succinct answers. So I understood there were two questions. First is, how do you identify an estate sale company that would be a good fit for your needs? And secondly, how do you best work with them as an estate planning attorney? Is that a fair representation of the questions?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you look for in an estate sale company? You're looking for a company that has experience, that has longevity, that is fully licensed, bonded, and insured in accordance with all state, local regulations, as well as federal regulations. Don't hesitate to ask for the DEC pages, the declaration pages on their insurance policies. Any reputable company is going to be more than prepared to provide that information. You want to make sure that all of their employees are hired properly as W-2 employees, and that they are indeed withholding taxes and operating as a professional company, because it also means that their employees would have workers' compensation insurance, so that if anything happened, the estate itself would not be exposed to liability because the company is not properly structured. You're also going to be looking for transparency. Any company who doesn't tell you their rates or willingly provide you with copies of sample contracts, those are red flags. Going beyond that, there should be transparency in the reporting. Most companies, a good company, I know we certainly do that, if you said, well, show me an example of what a settlement package looks like, it's a very simple thing for us to redact an existing settlement package and send that out to you, so you have a physical example of what you can expect to receive at the end of the process. In addition, the company, as sort of a final note as watching out for that red flag, is we should be easily able to talk about sell-through percentages as a company. I can tell you that for sales as a company, we sell through roughly 90% of the value and 75 to 85% of the physical contents at every sale every weekend. So that we know that that's going to leave, there will be leftovers. The question is, what do you do with them? And again, there should be a plan in place. The company should be able to present you with a plan on how to resolve those things quickly. So how do you work with us best? So does that do a good job of answering your first question? I think so. You're still with us. Okay.
Those are all very...
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Those are all very valid points, and some of those I'd thought of, and some of those I had not.
Right.
I guess just as a follow-up to that, do some of the companies sort of operate differently, not with regard to how reliable they are, but in the way that they go about attacking the problem and how they sell stuff, or are people basically doing it the same?
So that's another great question. So we have do companies operate in different manners? Are there different options out there? And then we still have your question of how do you best work with an estate sale company. So let me try to quickly get to answers to both of those. So most estate sale companies, not all, but the majority of estate sale companies tend to be one-trick ponies, where they can offer an on-site estate sale. They know how to come in, convert a home into a store, and we're not talking about how well they do or don't do it, we're just talking about what they do. So convert the home into a store and run an event from that location. And then they may or may not offer clean-out services. Now remember, there were going to be some 15 to 25% of physical contents that goes unsold, and that's where the clean-out services would come into play. We've been around a long time. For Sales has been around since 1972. So we're in our 45th year of continuous operation. And we've learned a thing or two about a thing or two, as the Farmers Insurance advertising says. And we offer both on-site and off-site solutions. So there are circumstances where an on-site estate sale is really not suitable. One of the easiest examples of that scenario would be a situation where you would have a client as an estate planning attorney who is living in a condo or apartment complex. Well, the costs go up substantially when you have to have a sale in an apartment building or a condo complex, because most of those facilities have access control issues both into the property as well as into the building. They require additional staff. And the biggest one is that they don't allow the elevators to be reserved for move-ins and move-outs on the weekend. And estate sales operate generally on the weekend, so they have no way to get their things out of the apartment once they've purchased it, unless they happen to live in the complex themselves, the shoppers, that is. So let me, if it's okay, does that answer your question? Because if so, I'm going to jump to the last question, Dan.
Yep, that's great.
Great. A good example, right? It's a good example, the apartment complex
that we sometimes run into,
yeah.
And so I agree with you. It's very important that you pick a company that can handle those issues and
right.
can do it off-site as well as on-site.
Right, so that's why we came up with our off-site solutions, exactly. And that's a slightly different business model, but that's certainly something that I could tell you more about offline. As far as how do you work with us as an estate planning attorney, the sooner in the process, the better. When an estate is actually going through the estate planning process, it's a very useful thing to have an appraisal, an inventory, or a general valuation done, because that leads you into a discussion of personal property distribution when someone passes. So doing a lot of that homework up front, first off, makes the process easier on the back end with regards to estate distributions. But the other thing is that, at least in my experience, people are reluctant to talk about their will, their testament, about what happens when they pass. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's very private information.
Right. So one of the things that helps to kickstart people into having that conversation about what do I do when I pass is what do I want to do with my stuff? Who do I want to have what when I'm no longer here? And so for you as an estate planning attorney, it's a great tool to kickstart the process of talking about larger estate planning, because it's such a simple thing. What do I want to have happen with grandmom's creamer and sugar? Well, I want them to go to Susie. Well, how do I make sure that Susie gets that? And how do I ensure that Michael gets granddad's firearms? Well, by talking about the stuff, it can kickstart the process of talking about the larger estate planning, because we all know that the real money in the estate planning is in the financial and real estate assets that people have, not necessarily in their personal property. So does that address that question?
It does, and I'd just add that in my experience, the fights are over the less expensive personalty more than they are over the value, the assets that get liquidated.
Absolutely, and that's why, once again, bringing us in early to help sort of kickstart that process and get people thinking about their stuff, and that makes it also a lot easier on the back end to deal with how do we sell and distribute the items that are not being given to family members.
Okay.
Is that good, Dan? I think that was a very thorough
Yep,
answer.
that's great.
Thank you so much for your call.
Thank you.
So that was a lot of information
Well,
that I
yeah,
think you
was
shared.
it too thorough?
No, it was great. So tell me who directly hires you. Who are the people that do reach out to you? Are they the owners of the homes, obviously the children of the owners of the homes, or the lawyers? I mean, who is it?
Well, we have a number of different people who direct business our way, if I've understood the question correctly. Most of our business, as a company, the vast majority of our business is done on word of mouth, on the basis of word of mouth. We've been around long enough that happens. We get a lot of calls in relation, especially now that the definition of estate sales has changed, to be talking about people who are moving and downsizing. So baby boomers, if you will, the next 20 years are going to be a very interesting place for us. Comes to us through real estate agents. Estate planning attorneys like the gentleman Dan who called just a moment ago, they have a constant flow of people depending on the age of their book of business. So the more mature their book of business and the older their client base is, the more frequently they're going to need our services, because there's always stuff that needs to be gotten rid of. The question is, how do you do it? As we've seen baby boomers aging out and passing away, on that side of the business, we're dealing more and more often with adult children of parents who are going into a retirement community, who are moving to be closer to their children, are moving in with their children. We've seen a lot of that recently. But we're dealing with adult children who are out of town. So what they're looking for, again, jumping back to Dan's question about what am I looking for in a company, there is always look at the testimonials. Ask to speak to people who've used their services to get the real skinny on what was that experience like. And you'll learn very quickly if it was a good company or a bad company.
Right, yes.
But my suggestion is, make sure you ask the questions and make sure the company's a good natural fit for you.
Yeah, no, they were great questions that you threw out there. We have another caller. So if you're ready.
Sure.
We have Bill in Fredericksburg. Bill, are you there?
I am here.
Hi, Bill. Daniel is here, so if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I would. Hi, good afternoon, Dan. I'm still fairly new to the whole process. I had kind of a two-parter question. I'm trying to educate myself. When I think of estate sales, I think of a mansion on a hill with lots of really cool stuff, expensive stuff, in the house that is trying to be sold. Is there such a thing as too small of a project to run through the estate sales project? And then I guess another question is, how far does for sales go? Would Fredericksburg be far for you to run an estate sale?
Okay, those are both great questions. So let me tackle your question about size first. So size does matter. Essentially, estate sales are a function of volume, value, and variety of items to be sold. So it's the 3 V's is what drives what we can do for you. It's one of the reasons why we always suggest a site visit to take a look and see what we're being asked to sell, because that's the easiest way, the quickest way to assess whether it would be a good project or not. So based on volume, value, and variety, typically the average home in the greater DC area, where 60% or more of the contents of the home are being made available for sale, in other words, not being kept by the owners or by the heirs, will typically average somewhere between 900 and 1,200 items to sell, and that should, depending on where you are geographically, lead you to a sale value of $10,000 or more. I can tell you, for example, that in Arlington, Virginia, as an example, the average sale value, so the total sale value of an estate sale, will generally range from $12,000 to $17,000 in gross pre-commission, pre-expense sales. So what we were always looking for are projects that will generate more than $10,000. There are projects which are smaller, where the volume, value, and variety don't equal to that sort of magic number of items and dollar value. And in those cases, as a company, we've come up with an alternative solution where we can come in, pick up items, move them to our auction center to be sold, and clear other items to charity and to trash as appropriate, and empty the property that way. When you get under about $6,000 to $8,000, that is, when you're down in that zone, you run the risk of the project being economically inverted, so upside down, and we never like a project. Our definition at For Sales of success is a very simple one. We want to return you a positive economic return for our efforts on your behalf. So the second question you asked was about our service area. We service everything from Baltimore to Fredericksburg, Frederick to Annapolis, so that's Frederick, Maryland to Annapolis, and we'll even go Richmond across to Charlottesville and up into the eastern side of West Virginia. So I hope that answers your questions, Bill. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks, Bill. And actually, whilst we're on, we might as well move on to the next caller. You are a popular man and a popular topic
well,
today.
I guess it's a good topic.
Okay, actually, no, we don't have a last caller. But what I would like to ask, actually, is if people are not moving or downsizing, but perhaps they have some inheritance items in a garage, single items, or as you say, a minimum value, but it's what they don't have to be moving or downsizing. They can sell off things, but perhaps they have a garage full of items.
Well, hopefully it's not the garage, hopefully it's the living room, but
Yes.
that's a personal preference from
Okay.
value. Now, there still is a value function in play. There are jobs that are simply too small, where you cannot, again, our definition of success for a client is economic, where we can generate them a positive economic return after commission and expenses.
Right.
So in order for an auction consignment to be successful, so that's part of our off-site solution, family of solutions, we still want to see $2,000 to $4,000 worth of gross sales as a minimum threshold. You know, we can do them as small as 2, but they're going to make a very small return, and it goes up from there because there's a cost of transport and then there's a commission that needs to come out.
Okay, so perhaps on that topic, I would love to know some of what are more unusual items you found yourself auctioning over the years.
Oh, everybody asks that question. That's
Well,
a wonderful.
come on then. Tell us something we
That's a
don't
wonderful
know.
question. Well, you know, we've seen some really fun things, and it's always interesting to know what people don't realize that they have. I probably find about a half a dozen pieces of Picasso pottery on an annual basis.
Wow.
The funniest is probably about 50% of the time they're on a shelf in the bathroom. Really, that's where you find them.
So people just really don't know they have something of value.
Well, or they got it from mom or dad and never put one and one together and came up with 2. I think one of the more interesting things we've ever sold was we were doing an estate project for a retired Army general, 3-star general, and he was a captain during World War II and carried the original set of D-Day invasion plans.
Wow.
And we were able to private broker a deal for that complete set of D-Day plans with the maps and the foil overlays. And he carried that everywhere he went for the duration of World War II, from the time they started planning the D-Day invasion.
Wow, my grandfather landed on the beach on D-Day, so hey, that resonates with me.
Well, what was also kind of interesting about that was after the war, he kept the plans, and then later had to get a dispensation for having held on to classified materials. You know, they were passé by the time you're 5 generations in, but it was still very interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Anything else? Any other larger items that you spring to mind?
One of my favorites in all the years that I've been doing this, and I've been leading For Sales through its paces. When I started, just to give you some idea, when I started, we had 6 employees and we did 30, maybe 34 client jobs a year. We have about 49 part-time employees, and we do in excess of 425 client jobs per year.
Tremendous growth. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. In all of those years and all of those jobs, one of my favorites was this small little silver pitcher that was a loving cup. It was 11 inches tall, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a loving. It was intended as a trophy, a loving cup type trophy, but it was in the form of a pitcher. And it was noted on their 1914 World's Livestock Fair, Chicago. And it was the most innocuous little silver pitcher, and you wouldn't think much of it. Its silver weight at the time, because this was fairly early on when I took over the company, its silver weight value was maybe $600-700. It really wasn't a big thing. But when you on closer inspection, and this is kind of goes to you have to know what you're looking at. This is not a business for people who don't continually educate themselves on categories of items and what's selling and what's not selling and who are what are the things to look for? What are the signs that something might be more interesting? And you have to very, very good sixth sense of, hey, this could be more interesting than it appears. So that little silver pitcher, according to the silver marks, had been done by a Chicago silversmith from the late 19th century. And it was interesting enough, they said, we really ought to try out our auction brokerage service, which is where we send higher quality, high-end items off to a higher-end auction house that is, a few levels up from where we operate with more household goods. So we sent this off to Rego's Auction in southern New Jersey, in Lambertsville, New Jersey. And they put it into an upcoming catalog auction, and it generated a tremendous result. Would you like to stab a guess by how many factors it went up?
No, I have no idea. Let's say.
That little pitcher sold for $21,000.
Wow.
It remains one of my favorite items because it was this little innocuous silver bit that was sitting inside of a storage unit, and nobody even knew what it was in the family. And when we returned them an economic return of that magnitude on that item, that can ask for nothing but a positive
That's
review.
amazing. Just think how many similar items are across the country, across the world, that people don't know they even have possession of.
Oh, I do all the time.
Yes. So tell me.
The world is a treasure hunt.
Yes. So with your clients, do they often, or is there any, can they have any say in the value? Or they want to stipulate a certain amount they get for it?
So that gets a little more challenging. I mean, it's certainly a fair request, but it also becomes a matter of managing nuance and detail. I see my role as president and CEO of my little circus, if you will. I see my job as mistake avoidance.
Right.
So that also means it's incumbent on myself and my management team to mitigate the opportunities where mistakes can occur. So what we generally will tell people, if you have a half a dozen, 10, 12 items that you absolutely have to have a certain price on, we can manage that. But when you start getting up over about 10, 12 items, it becomes very hard to ensure that that you don't miss something, that it doesn't fall through the cracks and you miss something.
Right.
So, again, this is all about mistake avoidance. So yes, we can manage that for a limited number of items. Because don't forget that part of the message you send me is you say, well, I want you to sell this dresser, but I don't want you to sell this dresser for less than $1,000. Right. What you're effectively telling me is, if you don't sell it, then I intend to keep it. So that leads us to a discussion of, are you having us clear the unsold items to charity and disposal after the event is over or not? If the answer is yes, and you have no intention of coming back to the property, then why are you holding the price firm? So again, it's the message is, if you don't sell it, I intend to keep it.
Yes, no, I get that completely. If somebody is looking to work with yourselves, geographically, how far do you operate?
As I said to Bill, what we do is we operate pretty much from Baltimore to Fredericksburg. So Baltimore, Maryland to Fredericksburg, Virginia. We'll operate from Frederick, Maryland, so north of Gaithersburg, across to Annapolis, Maryland. And then we'll operate primarily in the auction format, Richmond across to Charlottesville and up into the eastern side of West Virginia.
Fantastic.
And that's sort of our best geographic area. Now, we have been called over the years by past clients who now live in Delaware or Florida, and we'll transport a team down to them and run a sale in their location. Wow. I mean, obviously that's far more expensive, and they're hiring us because we're the ones they want. They don't just want an estate sales service, they want the best estate sales
Right.
service.
And talking to that, I know you wanted me to ask you about trademark, so obviously I want to give you the opportunity to talk to that.
Okay, well, For Sales is actually a registered trademark. Both the four ladies, the paper cutout, as well as the name For Sales. It was kind of an interesting experience. I've done a number of different patent and trademark items over the years in my career. But when I took over For Sales, it got kind of interesting because now it was mine to deal with.
Right, yes.
And we actually went about 6 rounds with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to get this approved, because they made the argument that For Sales, what we intended to say was FOR sales, that it was for sale.
Yes, yeah.
So we had to make a case to show that For Sales was an entity and that was not the intent. Well, at the time, we're obviously much, much busier now, especially as the population continues to age. But at the time, we ran an average of 4 sales per month. And we're way beyond that now. We run like 10 sales a month.
Right.
But we run 4 sales a month. We usually had a staff of 4 people on site. there were all of these factors that we were able to tie back to the word FOUR.
Great.
So
That works very well.
Yeah, it was an interesting business exercise, and it was important because we are a well-known name. We are recognized in the community. We do a lot of things through our corporate responsibility where we participate in the community. So the name does matter. A name matters, and being able to protect that name matters. Absolutely,
and I think it's nice that the people listening know the story behind it, because then the way it's spelt and they're able to find you will stick in their head more. Right. The FOUR.
Well, you always notice I emphasize the U.
Yes, absolutely. So so it makes it more memorable. So if people want to get hold of you, please tell everybody where they can find you on the web, and obviously telephone number if you'd like to say that again.
Sure. The best way to get a hold of us is at our main telephone number at 703-256-8300. We do have phone numbers in other geographic areas around DC, but the best number to give us a call at is 703-256-8300. And I would also encourage you to look us up on the website at www.fourSales.com. Loads of great information for both buyers and sellers.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you,
I could sit here and ask you questions for the whole day, but obviously we can do that another time. So thank you everybody for watching. If you'd like more information or want to be on the show yourselves, then please go to connectionhub.biz. Thank you.